Hey bike farmers, thanks for clicking in. If you or one of your loved ones got a new bike for the holidays, I think that's great. But if it came from a big box store, there's some safety issues we need to address right away. The problem is the same kid that just got done stocking the Cheerios is the one who assembled that bike. Things are going to be loose, things aren't going to be aligned, things can be put on backwards. Luckily, most of these can be fixed at home by yourself. This video is going to show you what to look for and what to do. One thing I notice all the time on these bikes is the loose kickstand bolt. This bolt has an 8mm Allen head in it. That's one of the common sizes. There's another one that I'll show you in a minute. Let's see if this one's loose. Yeah, look at that. So when you have a loose kickstand, a few things can happen. It can flop around and get stuck in the spokes. It can get stuck in your pedals. There are numerous things that can happen that can trip up the rider and cause a crash. Here's the other really common kickstand type. It's usually a 14mm. Try to get your wrench on it and just give it a snug. You got to be careful with these. This is an aluminum and it'll crack if you tighten it too much. The other kind is usually steel. You really crank down on it. And it's always a good idea to check it in the future. Another thing I see all the time with these bikes is loose seat posts. These quick releases can be adjustable. If you have some grease, put a little grease down in your seat tube. That'll keep things from rusting in the future. But these quick releases need to be tight, tight, tight. And what you can do is grab one side and then it's just like a nut and a bolt. Give it a turn or two, tighten it down. Try to get it to turn. If it turns, give it a little bit more. Just go a little bit at a time. You don't want to strip the threads. And that should be pretty good there. You got to hit it pretty hard to get it to move. And the other thing to look at is the seat clamp bolt. Now on this bike, it's a 14mm. And just give it a good snug. And there's one on the other side too. And I always just snug them both down. That keeps the seat from going up and down. You'll see these bikes all over the place with the seat pointed straight down or pointed straight up. The last thing you want is to be riding along and have this thing drop down. You just don't want it. Tighten it down. We see a lot of handlebars and a lot of stems with loose bolts. That is a big, big problem. You always have a couple here that clamp the stem onto the fork. There'd be one or two there. Don't worry about this one on the top too much. Now don't strip the threads. It's just got to be tight. And the other thing is you don't want the handlebars twisting on you. So just give these a snug too. Yeah, that one needed it. That one needed it. Yeah, all of these. And you can kind of get your reflector out of the way to get at that one. There you go. And that reflector's loose too. See, everything's loose on these bikes. You just go through and tighten things down. Then what you can do is find where your levers clamp and tighten those as well. And there's usually some for the brake levers underneath. And these will be 4 or 5mm Allen keys. This one is under here. There we go. Guten tight. If you have this type of stem, this is the most important thing you can do is just tighten that guy down and give these a good snug. You don't want that handlebar twisting when somebody's riding the bike. So here's something I noticed right away on this bike is the front wheel's in crooked. You can see how it's way closer to this side of the fork than this side of the fork. Now it could be two things. It could be that whoever assembled this bike didn't know how this quick release worked and they just put the wheel in crooked and then aligned the brake to it and it's all going to be wrong. Or it could be that the fork itself is crooked. The quality level of these bikes is very, very low. And so a lot of times you just get a fork that's out of alignment and you just kind of have to deal with it. But let's check this quick release just in case. Okay, so I've got the bike on the ground here with the kickstand. We're gonna open the quick release up. I'm gonna hold one side. I'm gonna turn this one until we get it completely apart. The first thing you wanna look for is check your springs. Yep, and here it is. Here's the problem. I'm gonna lift this up and pull this spring out. Okay, so here's the quick release. This spring was in the right way. You need the pointy end of the springs pointing in. This one was turned around that way, which made it so it wasn't fitting in the bike back here, in this part of the bike. it wasn't fitting in there right. So the spring then goes in pointy side in. So this is how the skewer goes. All right, so we're gonna put the skewer back in this way, pointy spring in, pointy side in on this side, and then the nut. Okay, so we're gonna tighten this down. Now I'm gonna put the bike straight up and down. I had it on its kickstand. Put the bike straight up and down. Okay, so I'm gonna hold this side and I'm gonna turn this side. And then this lever is open and closed, right? So it's open and then like that is closed. Open and closed. Okay, it's not just crank it down as tight as it goes. I'm still holding this side still. And then tightening with this side a little bit. And it gets tighter and tighter, and you can see how it's starting to fight back and it's not quite closed. We want it to fight back when it's sticking straight out, 90 degrees. I'm pushing down on the bike. You want the bike straight up and down. Make sure that your wheel is in the dropouts. That's the end of the fork, also called fork ends. And then when you get it tight, you tighten down your skewer. Okay, now that wheel ain't going anywhere. However, as you can see, even though we found that spring, it's a little better. We kind of closed that gap a little bit. It's a little straighter, but this fork is crooked. Now there's probably a way that you can improve that a little bit on this bike, but ultimately it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg of the quality issues you're gonna find. So just live with it. It's good enough to ride. This isn't a performance bicycle anyway. Now the rear wheels of these bikes are usually bolt-on, and that's usually a 15 millimeter. And those you just want to check. They come bolted on from the factory and they're usually pretty tight, but it's always a good idea to check them. The front wheels do not come assembled from the factory, and that's why you always find the problems there, because again, it's the same kid that just stocked the Cheerios. We see loose pedals on these bikes all the time. The right pedal is right threaded, this one's tight, and the left pedal back here, it's reverse thread, so this is lefty tighty. Usually on these bikes, it's labeled. We see a lot of times when people try to assemble the bikes themselves that they get it backwards and they ruin things. But the left side is reverse thread on the pedals. Both of these were tight on this bike, so we're okay, but you still gotta check it. If you don't have a pedal wrench, there's usually enough room to get a regular 15 millimeter wrench on there. It doesn't quite have as much leverage, but it'll work if that's all you have. All right, let's take a look at these brakes. So that kind of gives you an idea of how they work. Now disc brakes can be a little tricky because you have the rotor that goes through the caliper, and a lot of times the rotors are bent. This one doesn't look terrible, but if you do this, like I kind of find a spot right here where it's rubbing on this pad. So what you can do is just kind of go back a little bit and find that spot and just push the rotor over. Now you don't want to get your fingerprints on it too much. That'll help you to get things to stop rubbing. The other thing is squeezing the brake lever. You don't want brakes too soft, but you don't want them too firm. Now this one actually is aligned pretty well, so I'm not going to touch it. The cable's pulling fine. If you want to add a little bit of tension, which is like tightening the brakes so there's less travel in the lever, this is a barrel adjuster. And if you want to tighten the cable, you have to go lefty-loosey on the barrel adjuster. So it's kind of backwards too. But that will tighten the cable a little bit. So we can tighten that. The problem is when you tighten it, you're going to have more of a chance of things rubbing. But that brake actually feels better just by tightening it that little bit. And I'm going to leave it. But that's how you check a disc brake. Once you get your cable tension where you like it, it's always a good idea to just make sure that your cable anchor bolt is tight so that doesn't slip through. Because if that slips through, then you don't have a brake, you can't stop, and somebody's gonna crash. This front brake is the same way. You can look there. There's a little bit of rubbing, but that's gonna be okay on a bike like this. You can drive yourself crazy getting this disc straightened out just exactly perfect, and you can also make it a lot worse. So I wouldn't touch it. Good enough is good enough here. Generally a pretty good idea to check these bolts, just the bolts that hold the caliper on. And then again, if you want to add a little bit of tension, you can just turn that barrel adjuster out. Now on these department store bikes, those brake pads are going to wear down very, very fast. As the pads wear down, you can just turn that out a little bit to tighten them back up. But these brakes actually feel pretty good on this bike. So those are the 6 most common things that I find on big box bikes that need attention right away. Now, as a bicycle professional, I can never suggest that it's a good idea to buy a rideable bicycle-like product from a big box store. The quality grade of the materials and the componentry on these bikes is so low. That's how they keep them so cheap. You combine that with the lack of experience with the person that assembles them, and you're just asking for trouble. These products were not made to be serviceable, they were made to be purchased. I know everybody wants to buy their kid a brand new shiny bicycle, and with the prices so low at the big box stores, it's pretty enticing. And the kids don't really know the difference anyway. But the reality is they're gonna have a way better riding experience on a decent quality bike. I'm not here to discourage anyone from getting a kid on a bike. So many cycling enthusiasts that I know grew up riding a department store bike. That said, there is an option out there. Decent quality, reconditioned used bike. Most cities have a bike co-op or a used bike shop where somebody's doing this. Or, if you know what size you need and that sort of thing, you can always check Facebook Marketplace and bring that bike into a bike shop for a tune-up. You can accomplish that for about the same price as what you're paying at the big box store, but you're getting a much better quality product. And to be clear, we're not talking about performance here, we're talking about quality. You want to make sure that the brake pads aren't going to wear out right away. You're going to want to make sure that the tires don't wear out right away. These are the differences in quality that really come into play down the road. If the bike is still looking pretty new, a lot of times you can return the bike back to where you got it from, take that money, and go find a decent quality used bike somewhere instead. Despite the quality issues with this bike, this would make an excellent first bike for anyone. Thank you so much for watching this far. If you like what you saw, let me know in the comments. You can find me on Patreon. You can click all the buttons, and don't forget that notification bell so you and your bike can stay tuned.